project manager for the Association of American Publishers Pre-K-12 Learning Group. Long title. A little bit of background there. We are a division of the Association of American Publishers that serves the pre-K-12 educational resource community. That's organizations that are creating educational content, building platforms, etc., and companies that provide services to those organizations. So some of you may be familiar with my technically former employer, AEP, the Association of Educational Publishers, which merged with AAP School Division last year. The new learning group continues to provide those services that AEP was known for, which is professional development, networking, thought leadership, leadership around the LRMI. And then we also have a little bit larger focus on advocacy now that we've joined up with AAP. So we co-lead the LRMI with Creative Commons, and I'm not sure if Cable's here yet. Cable Green here? Cable Green should be joining us. He's the lead at Creative Commons on LRMI. We're very happy to be working closely with those folks to make sure the LRMI is a standard that really meets the needs of any organization publishing educational content, regardless of business model. And our role as co-leader is to really do outreach to the community to build awareness and educate about LRMI. We contracted with the fantastic team at Educational Systemics, Michael J. and Teila Evans up front here, to help us on some of those activities. So we organize events like this, and at ISTE, and at our annual conference called Content and Context. And we provide resources like LRMI.net, which provides information about LRMI and implementation guidelines and whatnot. So in the past, we've done events like this that are day-long workshops, so we kind of had to tweak that and condense it a little bit. So we're going to start off with some context. What problem is the LRMI solving or intended to solve? Then we're going to move into some more detail on the LRMI as a project and some updates. And then we're going to look at the process of tagging from high-level benefits, some strategic insights into tagging, and then our tagging activity is going to walk you through the actual tagging process. And then after we explore some of the common questions or issues that come up during the tagging process, we're going to talk about how you can get involved, and we'll do a formal Q&A, but feel free to ask questions throughout. This is a very interactive session. And there's some open seats on this side of the room if those of you who are trying to get in. Since we do have a lot to accomplish, I'm going to let each speaker introduce themselves as we go along. Before we get started, though, I wanted to do a quick poll of the audience and see what kind of different types of people we have. So how many here are educators? How many are administrators or technology director types? And developers? And content providers. Okay, thanks. So we're going to jump right in here with a quick, since this is South by Southwest, we thought we would add a little flavor. So we're going to do a quick dramatization that kind of helps to set the context for
You can't see that, but I'm the teacher. Here we go. All in all, my class is doing just fine, but every year, some students have an issue with fractions. What can I do? What can I do?
Try me.
Hey, I'm over here.
Well,
I'm just perfect, and I have exactly what you need.
Man, I am right in your browser. Don't waste another keystroke. Click on me.
I know you, I know your curriculum, I know just what your students need. I've got your context.
well, I've got to keep it simple, so I'll just use what I use at home, of course. GUIing. Here I come.
F-R-A-T-I-O-N. Oh wait, did you mean fraction? If so, I've got everything you need and more. 48,400,000 sites just for you.
Well, what I'm looking for must be in here somewhere. So let me look around.
Scroll next page, scroll next page. I can get you a new car at a fraction of the cost. Scroll next page, scroll.
Well, I'm not really even sure what I'm looking for. I know my student is in the 6th grade. I teach 6th grade, but is having problems with a concept taught just last year, or even the year before. Maybe I can refine my search.
FIFTHGRADE. Ooh, we're down to 545,000 sites. Maybe you want to use my search tools.
Let me see which search tools are available.
Hey, I can get you reading levels too. Are you interested?
Not so much what I'm really interested in right now. Kinda not really, so let me maybe try another search tool.
No, don't go.
Okay. Let me try this custom search engine over here.
CSE4ME.org. Log in or indicate what grade you teach.
Maybe this will get me a little bit closer.
6th grade selected. RFACION. If you meant fraction,
Darn
then
fingers.
I have 82,000 resources for you. Do you have a particular standard you're addressing with your students?
Let me look at the Common Core standards for fractions.
CCSS.math.content.5.nf.a.1. Add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators, including mixed numbers, by replacing given fractions with equivalent fractions in such a way as to produce an equivalent sum or different fractions with like denominators.
Kind of close, but this group of students is having, I think, a more fundamental problem. Show me more.
CCSS.math.content.5.nf.b.5a. Interpret multiplication as scaling, resizing by comparing the size of a product to the size of one factor on the basis of the size of the other factor without performing the indicated multiplication.
Well, that's kind of what I'm looking for, but I don't even really have a good idea of what these students really need. I hate to say it, but maybe I'll look at that digital planning.
No, wait,
tool.
come back, give me another chance.
GRESHAM. What is your password? PASSWOR. Why do I even bother?
Okay, so here I am on the calendar right now. This is something that I worked with my district to plan, and it took a lot of time. So hopefully this is going to be useful. Right around here is where I plan to be.
Fractions, simplifying fractions.
Well, let me select Steve. He's one of the students who seems to be having problems here.
Steve selected, displaying student profile.
Steve is clearly a sharp kid, I remember, but something is just not clicking. I wonder what the planner recommends.
So-so reader, likes hands-on activities. He's pretty verbal and seems to learn well while working in small groups. Could use some help with multiplication skills. I found 67 learning activities, of which you have access to 23, and I recommend you try these following 3.
Wow! How does it know? How does it know? How does it know? Hang on here. I forgot to do this up front. Hang on here. There we go.
And the Tony goes to...
Well, thanks. Thanks for bearing with me. It'll be available online for you. If you want to do it in your own school, you can.
And I think that the whole point of this skill is to define the problem that we all really know. Is this better? Yes, okay. My name is Sue Buesing. I feel tethered. Okay, thank you. My name is Sue Buesing, and I've done a lot of work in standards alignment, metadata tagging with LRMI, with InBloom, SLC, but my background is as a math teacher. And so when I approach a situation like this, I have flashbacks of, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So when we think about metadata tagging, what we're going to talk about with LRMI, we really need to look at a shift in the purpose. In the past, metadata tagging, alignment correlations, looking at resources from a publisher and a developer's point of view has really been for broad coverage of the standard. It's been for a marketing purpose. How can I show the state that this material aligns with what they need to have taught so that I can get this material adopted into that state so it can be used? And really, the focus is now changing to that of discoverability. alignments, metadata need to locate specific resources, because it's fantastic to have great things, but it's not fantastic if they can't be found, right? So that's really where the distinction comes. And if we look at the problem, if we look at Bing, Google, and Yahoo, that's a horrible amount of results if I type in fractions, right? Even the most narrow search of 33,400,400 results is not very helpful. And so as a math teacher, and I'm sitting there and I'm trying to figure out how can I approach these concepts in a new way that'll hit the learner's needs, or maybe this kiddo is struggling over here, how can I deal with that? And I type in and I get 44 million results. That's not encouraging. And so I don't know about you, I refine my search a little bit, and I refine it a little bit more, and then I think, that Purple Math workbook that I've used for the last 7 years really does have some good worksheets in it. And I go back to the Purple Math workbook that has those worksheets that I've used all the time. And so what we're looking at with LRMI is how can we use time more wisely, get directly to what we're looking for. And so one of the things that LRMI allows us to do, and I don't expect you to read all that, I know that's really small, but it allows us to refine search in a way that's really effective. And tools can use this. So this is actually a tool that was developed in Illinois. It's the ISLE Open Education Resources Search. And you can see when I just typed in fraction, or maybe you can't see, but it says that there are 2016 results. Well, okay, 2016 is still not very helpful, but it's a much better start than 44 million, right? And I'm not going to be offered a brand new car in this tool, right? And I'm not going to be distracted by this shiny bright thing over here, which is really what happens to me when I sit down and just start doing random searches, and I don't think I'm the only one. But you can see here, over on the side, in blue, there are a lot of different ways to refine the search in this tool. So we can refine by the standards browsers, by the grade level, the subject, the access rights, who owns the material, the educational use. So there's a lot of different ways we can refine. And just to show you that a little bit easier to read, group type, media type, what's the language? So I can then drill down, okay, I've got a student who's having trouble with 4th grade content. Where there's some resources. Okay, I really want to do a group activity. Narrow that down more. Narrow that down more. So that's really one of the ways that LRMI is helping to solve this problem.
Perfect. Thanks, Sue. And we'll be going back and forth throughout, so if we take a look at sort of shifts to think about, it's also always important to recognize the tendency is we tend to dive into these things and become our own little insular world. And we think it's really always important to reflect back on what are people who are consuming this thinking about. So when we look at an audience who are learners or parents, depending on, again, the age of the child, how can I do better in school? How can I differentiate myself? How can I get what I need based on sort of on how I learn? And how can I do well on sort of qualifying tests? And again, this is meant for an international audience as well. So it could be Common Core testing, it could be a qualifying test above. If you look at from the educator and institution's perspective, they're looking at how do I address the needs of this sort of increasingly diverse audience? How do I engage learners who have access to sort of these other rich resources at home, and now they're in school? How do I get them involved and engaged? And how do I compete with educational alternatives outside of what's happening in the classroom? And the next is really looking at, from the content developer and publisher's perspective, and even if you're a classroom teacher, you're a content developer in most cases, particularly if you're here, how do I provide a coherent offering that addresses the needs of this sort of diverse set of students? How do I make the most of this instructional asset that I have access to? I mean, we tend to niche these things and not think about more broadly how they can be used. How do I make the value of my product evident in the educational environment so that its appearance when people want to actually use it and not just sort of general awareness? And how do I transition my organization to sort of leverage these kind of emerging business models? So again, applicability today, but how does it evolve looking at the future? So jumping ahead to really look at sort of the actual tagging itself in the LRMI. If you can see these, it's hard to see actually with these lights down up front here. But if you look at these books, everybody has sort of a visceral reaction when they first see every one of these books, right? You've got the bodice ripper, you've got the sort of mystery. I could have found a lot worse, by the way. That's sort of for a PG audience. And then you've got sort of the mystery, and then you've clearly got the science fiction. I mean, we inherently pick up metadata based on our sort of everyday lives. There's a lot of that hidden just in the title, page there, and we are already classifying it. So recognize this classification process is inherent in what we all do. The question is, how do we do that in a sensible way, in a repeatable manner? Well, and if you look at, this is actually a study that was done, it's now about 2 years old, but again, I think a lot of the things hold true. If we look at educators and what they're looking for in instructional resources, they're looking for materials that support differentiated instruction, as we talked about, materials that support 21st century learning. They clearly are interested in Common Core, but they're also interested in sort of free online resources, imagine that, and materials that support, response to intervention, RTI, and a whole variety of other pieces that they're looking at. But they clearly have a sense of what their educators are, they know what they're looking for. The problem is we have no way to provide them with a way to find them in that fashion. So there needs to be some educational hooks associated with that. So why do we need a standard? This is the example. Everything that's food is good, of course. Sort of an evolutionary trait. And so I know something about, this is sort of a representation of a recipe. We can see that, potatoes and sort of general stuff, we know it's good because it has bacon. But I really don't, if I'm consuming this, I go, yum. It's got all the pieces I like, but I can't make really any more of an informed decision about this in terms of what I'm consuming than I can with that mystery book or the science fiction book. But we all know that there's a standard that has evolved over the last 2 decades, and that's this. How many of you use this when you're shopping? Right? I mean, it is cool metadata. I'm diabetic, so I look at that card. Everything I purchase, there's no doubt about that. And I can be an informed purchaser. Now, I knew because it had potato that something would be particularly high in starches. But this allows me to be able to make an informed decision, be an informed consumer. We need the same capabilities for educators to be able to make informed decisions, not just on how a product's been marketed, not just how somebody else said it's been used, but also in a way that gives them data about the resource itself so they can make informed decisions combining all of those pieces together. So now you never look down in the shopping cart the same way again, hopefully. You'll think, oh, metadata. So a lot of people think, oh, metadata, that's a whole new thing because it's a fancy name. This is, my wife and I were both teachers at one time. When my wife left the school district, there were 12 films, regular 35 millimeter films sitting outside near a dumpster that were being thrown away. Now I'm the pack rat in the family, but she actually grabbed these films. So we have them, and now we own a 35 millimeter projector, so we invite our friends over to watch science films, and being science teachers, of course. But inside the films was this little card. Now this film is from 1956, okay? That is not recent history for most of us. But look, this is all metadata. Content, authenticity, clarity, interest, grade level, appropriate for the grade level. And this is all the stuff that we're talking about now. The point is, we're not collecting a 3x5 card, and there's maybe more ways to make sense of that. So this has been something that's been really important to education, not just now, but in fact going far, far back. We're just really getting to the point where we have the technologies to do this sensibly. So we need a common set of descriptors that allow us to sort of structure our searches and recognize that common is not that common, right? We all know that if you're doing technology. You'd like to think that there's some common standards, but in fact there's not as much commonality as we'd like. The education benefits from not going it alone are even greater, even with the trade-offs. There's a tendency to think, if you're a publisher, I want to differentiate myself. Well, in fact, this is really not a good point of differentiation in terms of the kind of metadata and descriptive pieces. There's lots of other good ways to do that, but the benefits that have come to the market in terms of growing educator access and use of assets certainly come from having some common standards. We certainly lived in a world of different standards, and there's a representation of the Tower of Babel. If you want to disrupt a community from trying to make some unified decisions, the Tower of Babel is probably the most well-known story about that. And yet that commonality is so essential for moving towards individualized learning and teacher collaboration and a whole myriad of other things that I'm sure you're all aware of. But when an educator is searching for something, it's important, so if you look on the left side, if you say, hey, find a resource, and somebody says, oh yeah, it's over there in that pile of hay, the educator goes, well, I'll just go do what I was doing, because I don't have time to dig through the pile of hay. find that needle. The other side of this, of course, we've seen this before, where, oh, I can't find that, so I'm just gonna, in this side, I send that person to an iron or pit, and I say, you can get iron there and make your own needle. Well, we see a lot of districts and engineers who try to do that too. That's good in an area where you have expertise, but in fact, it's not a replicable model in all cases. So it's not about building your own, it's really about helping find that needle in that haystack, at least at a reasonable level of granularity. And that, again, is really why we have the Learning Resource Metadata Initiative, LRMI. LRMI comes now, this is probably the most, by the way, we're just going to talk again, so I apologize for that. It's not me as a science teacher, but I'll do it now anyhow. The goal is to, again, make it easier and more convenient to find learning resources. And it really comes now because of the intersection of these three opportunities. One is, again, strong curriculum standards. And by that, I don't mean just Common Core standards. We're seeing that happen internationally. Certainly ISTE, having strong teacher standards, technology standards, et cetera. We're seeing, again, unified around some of those. There's schema.org, which is a standards organization around web. How many of you have heard of schema.org? Okay, good. So there's good background here about that. For those of you who don't know it, you certainly can look it up, but it's about data for sharing information around web-based assets in all areas, movies, video, books, I mean, a lot of different areas, again, related to digital pieces. And so this idea of a distributed index, so if we look at learning resource registries as opposed to repositories, the idea that we now can gather information, metadata that describes a resource and be able to distribute that, again, underlies the concept of any resource registry, but particularly in the US, I just lost it. The Learning Registry. Why, it just sounds so duplicative, say it again. The Learning Registry, again, by the Department of Ed and the Department of Defense. So again, why to do this? Really, it's about improving search results. If, for those of you who haven't seen this, do try it. I'm not going to go through this with you, and you can certainly try it now if you wanted to do that. But if you go to Google, for example, right now, and you search on, you can search on your favorite food. The one we typically use is potato salad. If you go to potato salad and you search on, you'll get a whole bunch of results, like millions upon millions of results. But if you go under a section that actually talks about sort of more data off to the very right side of the search bar up there, it'll actually give you information about number of calories, how long it takes to make it, and you can exclude or add that certain ingredients should be included. Our goal with the LRMI, one of our goals is certainly that that kind of capability exists for learning resource metadata. So that you, as you're searching for something like fractions, as Sue and I were discussing, that you could say, I want this for a third grader, and I want it for kids working in pairs, and I wanted to address this particular standard. That's really the intention behind the LRMI, but there's also a richer set of possible uses, and one of those was in the skit that we did, talking about a planning tool where it may be embedded within it. You may not even know that you're doing a search, but in fact it may recommend resources as part of that. And again, the LRMI really forms a foundational piece for making that search educational and instructional in its nature. So the LRMI has historically been funded by the Gates Foundation, and it's a collaboration between the Creative Commons and Dave's organization, which is not the AEP. I have an old graphic up here. AEP and the AAP merged to become an organization known as two vowels and a consonant, the AAP. And so those two organizations, again, looking at open and looking at the publisher, created kinds of materials to really move this ahead. I like to think about the kind of difference that LRMI has from, for example, things like Dublin Core or LOM or other pieces, which are really more descriptive pieces. If you go to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and many other museums as well, you'll notice that there are many different kinds of descriptions on pieces of art. One of them is for those who are visually impaired. And you know, if you're visually impaired, you don't know what you're not seeing. And so it tells you something about, you know, it's a painting 2 feet by 3 feet, and it has this kind of medium, and it has broad brush strokes, and all those kinds of pieces. Historically, that's the kind of metadata, descriptive data that we've had around instructional resources. It has this many pages, it has this many pictures, it's by this publisher, it was done on this date. None of which, I hate to think an educator is saying, I need a perfect resource, I want one that has 56 images. I mean, that's not how you're selecting resources in most cases. So what you're really going to do is really look at the part that we do look at in museums, which is this collections kind of description, which is the commentary by artists, curators, the context of that particular piece of art. And that's really what we're looking at in the LRMI, is what is the instructional context for that? So that's really the richness that this metadata schema actually brings. I like to use this quote from Ansel Adams. You all know Ansel Adams, photographer. And so I think it really describes the whole LRMI tagging process that actually Sue's going to be taking us through. Is there is nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept. And if anybody here ever done tagging or correlations work, yeah, I mean, isn't that what it is? It's like hard, because there's never a precise fit. It's really sort of a conceptual piece that you're trying to grab. And so there's an art and a science to this process, and it's important to recognize that, because you'll never be able to fix that. Right? It's a political process. Education is an art in parts, but it's for the science part. So don't fight it. You know, I think Obi-Wan Kenobi said it best: use the Force. I have to admit, it may be the only time that Ansel Adams and Darth Vader have been used in the same sentence. There's been an AEP, now AAP program, again, gone through 3 phases. I won't go through this in detail, but really just recently, back in June of 2011, the actual technical discussion around development just happened. So people say, gosh, you know, you've been doing this for 2 years, how come it's not done? Well, the standards are almost never done. It's an evolving, continuing process, because we moved this rather quickly through draft properties, et cetera. We built awareness then in 2012 to 2013, proof of concept, and it was in April of 2013, just a year ago, that it was adopted by Schema. So again, very recent. In phase 3 now, we're actually doing a lot of other kinds of support. We'll talk about this a little bit more, and Teila will update you on some of that. So lots of things happening around the LRMI. Again, properties, as I said, are part of Schema. Publisher awareness has increased from 47 to 86%. Increased among, interest among companies for tools. And again, another important part for those of you who work with EPUB 3, LRMI can now be referenced in an EPUB 3 wrapper. So you can actually reference those attributes, which is a really important movement, particularly as we're seeing publishers that have traditionally created print materials trying to figure out how to move to digital. Really, the ability to describe that and have that carried with the asset is a really key component of that. And we're seeing similar things happening around work with IMS and other kinds of standards. So, and increasing global outreach. Just lastly, before I pass this back to Sue, I think it's important to think about what we're doing today as being an important move. A move from resource-centric thinking to learning-centric. What am I doing? I'm doing that book. No, in fact, you're really focusing on a particular kind of thing that's being taught, and you're using resources to support that. Moving from instruction from the institution to the learner. Right now, we think about institutions as purchasing resources, where in fact, we need to think about the learner as the consumer and the role of the institution as a facilitator of that process. We're also looking at moving away from media to really thinking about the nature of the engagement. Because that could be multiple media being used in that process. And then also moving from adopted resources, as we traditionally think about, even in private schools, the process of reviewing, to being a much more dynamic process of discoverability, but without losing the accountability that comes with that and knowing that you're actually addressing it. So the LRMI underlies a major shift in this marketplace and the way we think about educating and the way students learn.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does the LRMI address the quality of the content at all?
It doesn't do that at all. And part of that is we're trying to put together sort of a common set of nomenclature around describing the resource. There are groups that are doing quality. For example, if you look at Common Sense Media, for example, you may be familiar with them. We're working directly with them. They're using LRMI as ways to describe, but then they're adding other kinds of review process on top of that. We find if you couple the two together, it ends up being so controversial and so difficult that we don't make the sort of important leaps that we need to make.
The reason I asked is that almost, in my mind, it's an integral part of that decision-making process. That you mentioned you can get 43 million variants on fractions, but which one matters to your learner? And the Wikipedia model or some other model where the LMI gets implemented is the next question I would have, is how does this happen so that not just a generic search anymore, it's something that's structured for finding those resources quickly.
Yeah, and you know, part of it is explore, look at how IEL is extended on the LRMI. The issue is that every time we tried to take that next step, they kept sliding back because there was no common manner for even just simply describing the resource in terms of its instructional relevance. And to get to that conversation about quality, we need to also make sure that we're comparing similar pieces instructionally in the context in which it's being used. So we just took that as an incremental step where we knew we could get more agreement across the market so that we could get to that essential conversation about quality in context. I mean, I can't say that a resource works or doesn't work. It depends on how it's applied instructionally. And so let's include those parts. Yeah?
Well, I would think that quality would be best addressed by crowdsourcing.
And boy, this is a good conversation. There's pros and cons, and we can talk about some of that too. Yeah?
Is this adopted at the university level, or is this K-12?
So LRMI is meant to address all education. We decided to carve away first the K-12 side because the business models around that make sense in terms of who's the consumer and how sense is being made around that. We find in the higher ed marketplace, there's a little bit diversity. There's some sort of specific standards that have been set up in other places. We see it as some place that LRMI will go. We've had a lot of inquiries and a lot of interest. Honestly, I don't know how that's going to evolve there, but it's intended to address higher ed as well. Great.
All right, well, I'm going to dive in a little bit. When we talk about how does this work, how do you get into the nitty-gritty of what does that mean? You've got all these fields and you've got resources, and how do you marry the two? And so really there's two parts of that. First of all, having common educational standards is a real key component. And at this point, right now, as a launching point, LRMI has started with the Common Core standards, which address math and language arts and other subjects built within that. So just a really quick summary for those that may not be familiar with the Common Core state standards. They were created with input from teachers, parents, and community leaders. And really the goal is clear and consistent standards across the board. Now I know I'm in Texas, and Texas has not adopted the Common Core. And actually, truth be told, I'm from Nebraska, which is one of the other states that hasn't adopted the Common Core. But the goal is to have clear understanding. And growing up as a military child, I know that's really important because I completely missed earth science. But I took physical science twice because I moved in the school district from Colorado to Nebraska. You know, so there's a lot of value in that. Not just on the broad sense, but what about a kiddo who moves from within one state? I mean, there's a lot of continuity that's necessary. They're designed to be robust and relevant to the world, to go beyond the classroom, but into the how do you prepare a student for actually getting out of school and maybe not living in their parents' basement. Focus on the core conceptual understandings and the procedures. So there's concepts and there's procedures, you know, that the math standards really focus on what is the thinking process, the process standards. And then reflecting knowledge and skills needed for success in college and careers. And so that's something that is common in 45 of the states, and that's where LRMI has started. Now this is technical knowledge because there's some developers and content people in here. When you're looking to reference the Common Core standards in LRMI, there's actually 3 different ways. There's the dot notation, which conveniently has 2 forms. One would be the published form that was released to everyone, and then there's the form that has the cluster headings. So you'll see there's a difference in there. If you look on the Common Core website, they actually do include it's in green, the A, B, C, right after the strand. That's not in the published document, so that will make a difference for you if you're working on that. There's also the URL that directs you to the Common Core standard, and then there's the GUID, right? So there's different ways that you can refer to the standards. LRMI makes use of all of those. So that's just really important to understand, and remember to use that cluster heading or you'll be doing a lot of work over, says the voice of experience. In also looking at the hierarchy of the Common Core, it's important for those who care about the technical side of things to understand that the math and the ELA hierarchies are conveniently different, so that you need to make adjustments for that. You'll see that there's some optional levels of the hierarchy and some places where it doesn't match up. So I'm not going to go into a lot of that, but just a little red flag for you if you're working on the content side. There are other standard sets that will be used for LRMI. Common Core is not the end. There's not a period and close the page. There's definitely lots of other standard sets that are available. Some examples, the next gen science standards. Looking at, with Common Core, states were allowed a 15% change. So those states all have their own, and again, conveniently, they've changed a lot of the coding and labeling and how they address the standard. So if you're working with the 15% states, that's something to keep in mind. Texas and the other states, Nebraska, that did not adopt the Common Core state standards. Lexile is a whole nother set of standards that there's a lot of power, and Trilby will be talking more about that, to being able to reference more depth of what the resource is addressing. And then a range of subjects. I think everything revolves around math, but I know it doesn't. And so there's other subjects that will get some attention. And then the professional standards, National Board of Professional Teachers standards, any professional development. There's all kinds, there's no limit on what standards can be addressed. The starting point has just been the Common Core. And so that's what we're gonna look at today. So when we combine that, we go back to the problem of not being able to find good resources in a way that's useful. You combine your accurate standards with the LRMI tagging, and then what happened was that fields of important metadata were identified, and it's already been brought up. There's a lot more information that people want. So this is kind of like the ground level, right? And so there's three categories. There's general information, things that are pretty simple like title, URL, language, when the resource was created, who owns the rights, who's the publisher, what's it based on. So that's kind of general information about the resource, okay? Then when we look at the educational information, who's the end user? Is this a lesson plan and the end user is a teacher? Is this a tutoring site and it might be the parent? Is this a student activity or an administrator? What's the age range? And you'll notice there that says age range, not grade level. And the reason for that is that LRMI is not limited to the United States. So when you're looking at a global application, our third grade doesn't match up nicely and neatly with somebody else's level 4 or whatever they have. So the age range just requires a little bit of calculation. Okay, my child is 8 and in 2nd grade. Oh, okay, I want to look at 8-year-olds, right? I mean, so there's a little bit of skill involved there, but it's not too tough. Educational use, what's the purpose? What's the interactivity type? And as somebody who's looking for resources, wow, that's really powerful. How do I want this to play out in my classroom? What's the interactive type? What's the resource type? And how much time is required? Is this something I can do in 45 minutes, or is this a 3-month lesson plan, a unit that I'm going to be addressed? So that's all pretty key information if I'm looking for a resource. Then when we look at alignments, you need to look at the educational alignment, that correlation, which is a part of the metadata. How does this match up to the standards that I'm looking for? Looking at the alignment type, and we'll talk about that in just a second. You've got your dot notation, and again, your item URL. And then a description, that's the actual text of the standard, as David read so smoothly for us from those math fraction standards. So when we look at this is just a little snapshot, a little bit more detail about educational alignment. Again, currently we're looking at the National Common Core Standards. This is really important. The alignment type, there's other choices for vocabulary that Michael will go into, but really it's important for us to understand that a resource can be aligned to the same standard more than one time. So a resource could teach a concept and assess a concept. So that would be 2 alignments, right? So that if you have content out there and you want it to be discovered, make sure you tag it for all that it really does, okay? You can also use requires. So if I'm a teacher and I'm looking for something to support material that I've already taught that the students have gotten, I want to launch off of that, that requires is pretty key information, okay? And then the dot notation that you can pull off of the Common Core website, the item URL, and that's also from the CCSSO website, and then the description. This slide was taken from a tagging tool that was put out by In Bloom, and so that's what that little snippet is from, but there are other tagging tools such as ISLE and other tools. Yes?
I'm not a developer in the same exam question, but are people just tagging their content and then it's being picked up in search engines?
That is an awesome question. So she said, are people tagging their content and then it's being picked up by search engines, or are you having to upload it? And the answer is, at this point, it is needing to be uploaded to something like the Learning Registry, a tool that's out there, or a district already has. Go ahead.
However, we're starting to see search engines and spiders being planned at least to be able to crawl the web. So you can actually embed the metadata as microdata or RDFA. There's certainly conversation in those communities about how to embed that in the header of a site so that it can actually be captured. So it's not hard to do. So we're suggesting if you upload it to the Learning Registry, you also look at headers just simply embedded in the asset itself.
So then, when the search engine crawlers are starting to pick that up, and the funding that you talked about that's being developed in the potato salad example that you gave, well then one day the educational resources will show up in the same manner that they can be filtered within the search engine? Is that the plan?
Oh, yes, that certainly is. It's the dream. Yes, I mean, that's in part. But we also, I think, so as we said in the skit, it'll still have limited power that way. I think it's when you start embedding it in actual educational practice where it'll take on its own.
Yeah, so I'm an architect for a courseware and content company, and one of the issues that I've been struggling with is, with RDF specifically, like what are the biggest wins that we should really look towards in starting to tag our curriculum in general? Because in the higher ed space, RDF has had a long history of not being incredibly successful. And I don't want to repeat the same mistakes I made in the higher ed space in K-12 by adding a bunch of metadata that isn't ultimately going to be used anymore.
Yep. There was a term, I was at the EduPub meeting about 2 weeks ago, and there was conversation about Colin Smythe with IMS said something about, this prolific unused metadata. So, I mean, it's a challenge. I call that pumice. So we had a lot of pumice out there, that unused metadata. Our goal is to really play both sides of that ecosystem so that there are people who are consuming it and there's a demand for it. So, I mean, that's just part of the process. The microdata versus RDF issue, I don't know how to solve that.
Yeah, I mean, at least if there were some core vocabularies that people could agree on that would be most valuable, rather than just saying you can do anything, and we end up doing different.
Right, and that's really a key. And if I think about it, if I call something a quiz and you call it an assessment, we're not going to find each other, right? I mean, so Michael's going to talk about the recommended vocabulary. If you take the recommended vocabulary away from this, you lose the power in speaking the same language and finding the resources. So when we look at making alignments, if you have content or you're a teacher creating your own content or looking for content, really making alignments, there's some pretty important things. Decide how you want your material to be discovered. And as we go through the tagging exercises, keep these things in mind. Decide how you want your material to be discovered. Think like the person searching for your materials. Right? So try and if you're not a teacher and you've never been a teacher and you don't ever want to be a teacher, find a teacher to talk to and ask them how they think about this. If your end user is the teacher, try and figure out how they're thinking about it. Because I can tell you as a teacher, there's lots and lots of technology that was developed by somebody who never wanted to be a teacher, and it was my job to figure out how to use that, right? And we need to make a shift in that. Keep in mind that the Common Core standards are very, very broad. You're not going to have many resources that address a full standard, right? And so if you meet part of that standard, you can align to that standard. Does that make sense? Nobody expects a resource, maybe somebody, I don't ever expect a resource to address the full breadth of a standard, okay? And then remember to use all three types of alignments: the teaches, the assesses, and the requires, because those really give a lot more power to your resource. I found this quote last year. I thought it was really insightful. Districts, administrators, and teachers are seeking ways to turn the corner towards Common Core. What's needed in classrooms all over the U.S. as we make this historic shift to the Common Core is content, content, content. And I would add content that you can find. Because if it's all out there and we can't find it, it doesn't do anybody any good. So the key is to make the content discoverable. So, all right, I'm going to turn it over to Trilby.
So in that space between standard
not at this point. There's a lot of discussion, there's been a lot of attempts. The question was, is there a way to determine what part of a standard is being addressed? And at this point, no, not with what's available.
So I
That's a
just have
clean
to
and
share the
easy
secret.
answer.
I'll just share the secret because Sue is trying to not, she has post-traumatic stress about this. So Sue really drove this granular identifier project, which was to try to break down the standards into these more granular formats. And how'd that go, Sue?
I'm here.
Yeah, there we go. But it's such a political
It
and
is,
difficult
it is.
process. So we're still, it has to be done. It's important. Yeah,
And the reality is that people are doing it themselves.
yeah.
And then what happens is that nobody's speaking the same language, because I may break it, define the granularity a little bit differently than you might, and then we're back to that whole not having the same vocabulary. So you're right, it's a really big issue.
Yeah. Good.
Hi, I'm Trilby Berger. I'm with the company MetaMetrics. We're based in Durham, North Carolina. And what brings me to this conversation is MetaMetrics is an educational research firm, and our mission is to develop scales on which you can measure kids or students' reading, writing, mathematics, ability. But we've also, what we've done that's pretty unique in the market is we've also put on that same scale the activity, the text, the resource, measured that on our scale as well, so that then you can make a better match, a better targeted match, so that you can affect better personalized learning. And we're going to be making our flagship framework available within LRMI. It's the Lexile Framework for Reading. If you aren't familiar with that, it really is the most widely used measure of readability in US K-12 today, and heavily referenced in the Common Core documents. So this is a particularly exciting project for us, and we want to be involved with it because our whole mission is working to make this content instructionally relevant and to personalize it to particular learners. So you've talked a lot about the different possible tags and alignments. I'm going to talk about this a lot less technically. I'm more interested in the curriculum side. So you've got the learning resources, and what LRMI is also going to do to affect this instructional relevance is allow you to tag to particular educational objectives, educational frameworks, and achievement standards. Some of those particular ones that Sue and Michael both have already addressed, but there are a few different ones here. The achievement standards, like the Common Core state standards, or individual state standards, again in the example of where states have not decided to adopt the Common Core. Organizational frameworks that are used, such as grade or age, you'll be able to tag in that way. This next one is a big one, and again, near and dear to my company's heart, text complexity. And this is getting so much play in U.S. education right now, again, because of the Common Core. In the ELA standards, it really is one of the 5 big shifts in the ELA standards is the focus on text complexity. So being able to tag to not just the Lexile Framework for Reading, but many of these other great resources that are available, such as Fountas and Pinnell, Renaissance Learning, their AR measure, the FOG, and then again Lexile. Content area frameworks also you'll be able to tag to. I used mathematics in this case. You could tag to the NCTM, National Council of Teachers of Mathematics focal points, or the Quantile framework for mathematics, which also, by the way, happens to be our intellectual property at MetaMetrics. And then another example here, I'll just read one more, subject classifications as the ones that are used in higher ed. And we've already talked a bit about the different properties that you'll align to. Sue has addressed that, and I think we'll get into this in the tagging activity. But I want to show you some examples of what some of these instructionally relevant tags might look like. These are fictional examples, by the way. This first one is would be an example of how you might tag a mathematics learning resource to the Common Core mathematics standards. The second one, you can see how you might align at grade level to a state level standard, in this case Massachusetts, and then the higher ed subject classification standard alignment. And I wanted to show you, again, as I mentioned, we're going to be opening up the Lexile framework to LRMI, and this is what our alignment properties will look like when you're searching for us. We'll be under text complexity. The educational framework will be Lexile. And the target description, Michael, how do I...
Just click on the, yeah.
Got it, okay. All right. Sorry about that.
No, it's my fault.
User error. So when you click on that target description, you're going to come up to a site that we've developed, and you'll be able to read the description of what is the Lexile framework, in case you don't know what that is. How can it be used to match reader to text? And it will also have, it's not on the screen there. And it also has a list of the Common Core grade ranges and how they've been mapped to our Lexile framework, to the Lexile framework text bands. Yes?
Does the Lexile framework map to foreign language instruction as well?
We only have, the Lexile framework is in Spanish. We have hopes and dreams of creating a Mandarin scale, which we've started to do a little research there. But currently it's just the English, and Spanish. Oh good, there we are. So this is the example of what you would see if you went to the target description. And there's the Common Core grade bands. This is all expressed in the Common Core document, by the way. The grade bands or the specific grade levels match to the Lexile text ranges that are recommended for those grades. Then in this case, we're talking, our target name is a 600L, which is a place on a node on the Lexile framework. If you would then click on to get more information about that, you would click on this URL that we've created, and as you can see, you'll get exemplary text of what 600L might look like, and then a list of books that we've measured that fall in that 600 range. So just so you can have some examples of what that looks and feels like.
Let me add the one piece that we talked about. It's just Trilby's not the actual coder in that organization, but for those of you who are developers, as you can recognize here from the HTML, is you can display that information however you want within your application. So that's the nice part about the representation of the Lexile, is that it's not like you're just sitting somebody outside. You can actually say, here's my asset, here's where it's Lexiled, and here are some examples of similar assets that a teacher, again, can make an informed decision about, is that kid really at that level? Is that what I expect? And how might they use that? So it's an integrated solution because of how they're building that.
Exactly. Because Lexile isn't necessarily a panacea, really. We really count on the teacher and the parent and the student themselves to be the judge of that. And then one last...
You have one more connection?
No.
So let me know. Sorry, everybody.
But anyway, so what? Why is this important? There's a big problem, as I'm sure, especially those of you who are educators and administrators are aware of, is it's really, really difficult to teach in a classroom. Say you have a 5th grade classroom, there's all level of learners in there, particularly if you're talking about reading levels or text complexity. Sure, you may have a 5th grade textbook, but I think we all know there's no more a 5th grade textbook or resource than there's a 5th grade size shoe. You're going to have some kids that are well below that level and not be able to access that information. You're going to have some that are right on target, and you're going to have others that are the outliers who need more challenge. You want to keep them more engaged, so you want to give them something a little trickier. So having this kind of information is really going to help personalize learning, help teachers target, hone in on materials that are going to suit their instructional needs, and hopefully, just the bottom line, make the result of this be more meaningful content searches.
Perfect. Thank you, Trilby. Before Teila comes up, who actually works in my organization and really supports all of you who want to do tagging and can do hand-holding and thinking through that, I just want to say, I'm going to go through a little bit more detail about each one of the objects. What we're really driving for, because this is called a workshop, and being the classroom teacher that I was, that means hands-on. So we actually have some assets, and if you have assets that you're interested in, we want you to work in smaller groups in just a little bit. And you can actually tag assets. And it's really a good way to sort of get a sense of issues of granularity and finding where things fit with the Common Core standards and how to use issues of media type and other pieces. So we'll get some hands-on opportunities with that. But in order to do that, we just want to walk you through a little bit about these properties. So you heard Sue and Trilby talk about these. And if you're taking pictures, you can get this too. I'll be happy to give it to you. Yeah, it's not a secret. So, so along the side there, you see those educational terms. So again, this is pedagogically, maybe once you hear it the third or fourth time, you'll actually remember them. So this is our third time. So, and so you can see those educational role, et cetera, et cetera. But let's dig into just a little bit of detail around that. So if we look at educational role, you'll notice that important to recognize in the schema world, there is no such thing as a controlled vocabulary. And so I want to get to the question that the gentleman over here asked, which is this issue about crowdsourcing and sort of the quality that comes with that. The tendency in the schema world is to believe in crowdsourcing, which is the best vocabularies will rise to the top because they're most used. Well, I've been 30 years in education, and I can tell you, we're a pretty divergent thinking community, right? There are words that get used, the same words that get used for multiple things, and words that are different that mean the same thing. So I don't see this community, based on the last 3 decades, as coming up with a common set of terminology. And that's where having a controlled vocabulary may be helpful. Not that you're trying to put a stake in the sand and disagree with anybody else, but we're just saying, let's at least all call it this for a moment. And then you can use whatever terminology you want on the outside. So that's where the group think sometimes gets in the way a little bit in commonality. But you can see instructional resources that are described at LRMI can be for professional development purposes. The focus can be for a teacher. It could be for a parent to understand how they can support their child in teaching that. It can really be any number of different audiences, and this may evolve over time as well. The next one is this educational use. You'd expect this to be one of the biggest lists. And you'll see there are a whole myriad of different pieces there. We expect as this community matures that this will continue to evolve. Some of the states, for example, there are 12 states that are making use of LRMI terminology as part of some underlying work. Some of them have chosen to call this down, and that's fine, certainly. So we expect there to be customization and use around that, but you're probably fine using the core set that are listed here, and again, we expect that to evolve. The idea behind educational use is it describes the nature of how the learners engage with that. What is it they're actually doing? Interactivity type, I know I've said this, we're being videotaped, but it sucks. I mean, it's really it's a great property, but the values right now actually come from an IEEE standard that was developed who knows how long ago. So we expect that as soon as the governance is put in place, and we're working really hard right now with Creative Commons to put that together, we expect this will be one of the first places where we really expand this out and think about that in terms of how we actually use it. The good news is, it is an adopted property at least, so now we can mess around with the values that are included. The next one is looking at typical age range. I'll just reiterate what I think Sue or Trilby said, and that is that we use age instead of grade. We're already seeing use of the LRMI in Spain, Germany, other places. You know, the term grade means a lot of things in different places, and they don't even use the term grade in some places. So there are levels, and there are other pieces. You don't actually even need to make the extrapolation. As part of that standards piece, you can actually create mappings from, you can say this is the Spain grade level mapping, and it would then map age to a particular grade, so you could then search on that. So we're already seeing some of those kinds of pieces evolve out of this. Learning resource type actually reflects on the nature of the resource, not necessarily the engagement, because they're really typically two different things. We try to tease these apart. So it could be an activity, but is it hands-on? You know, there are different kinds of things that can be done. So these work in concert. It's also important to recognize that when you're tagging, you can multiple select. So it's not just one, you can actually just repeat that property and include another value for that property without any problem. So it handles all of that kind of capability. And again, we expect this will continue to evolve as well. And lastly, we have alignment type. We've already talked about assesses, teaches, and requires as really nice modifiers. It's really very powerful, particularly as you're putting together learning systems, because the ability to be able to look at an asset from different perspectives about how it's being applied. We have the text complexity, reading level, but then we have these other kinds of mapping. So it's important as you begin to think about yourself or others who you're working with that when we say educational alignment type or a standard, we're not just talking about curriculum standards. We're talking about any kinds of descriptive standards that fit within education can be described within this particular property within the LRMI. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Teila here, who works with, she gets down and dirty with those publishers and with educators who are doing this. So she here's the experience.
Thanks, Michael. So my name is Teila Evans. I work with Educational Systemics, and I have a really exciting job. I get to work with content creators and publishers around the LRMI. And kind of be the main point of contact for folks who are really interested in learning more about the implementation process, learning about how you can integrate the LRMI into your existing workflow. So kind of what I want to talk about, and I'll touch on a few things that Trilby, Sue, and Michael all talked about as well, is the FAQ. So I really go through the process, the support process that we go through when you contact us, and how that process flows. So really we want to get you from this frustrated point, or this point where you're not even sure where to start. There's tons of, there's properties you have to go through. You're not sure how you do a crosswalk between your internal content management system and the LRMI properties. We really want to get you from that to this. Feeling like you're on top of the road, you're confident, you have a real firm grasp on the properties and how it applies to your business. So I'm going to walk a little bit through the support process. So first, typically what we're going to do is an introductory meeting. So we're going to really talk all things LRMI. And this is going to be similar to a lot of what we've been talking about earlier, except more specific to your business. It's going to be a chance for us to meet your webmasters, your content creators, people who are making decisions within your organization, because we want them all to really be involved and a part of that process. So we'll go through the background in LRMI. We'll also learn a bit about your resources, like who you're serving, understand the market and who you're trying to reach. And of course, really just try to understand your objectives for metadata tagging. So from there, we're going to go into the LRMI data dictionaries and templates, so kind of reviewing a lot of the properties that Michael had up there. So we have a data dictionary that outlines all the LRMI properties, as well as the schema.org properties that you can use for LRMI, and then as well as a template, which you all have a chance to see, except kind of a modified version of that for the tagging activity we'll do after this. But that'll be a chance for you to go ahead and take sample resources and put that into your template, and we can see if maybe you need to develop a crosswalk like Michael was talking about between what you have internally and what the LRMI properties have. So at that point, we're going to go ahead and review that sample metadata, and that's going to be a time for us to do a walkthrough with you, offer recommendations on best practices for how you should tag your content. And I'll go a little bit more into detail about what are some common questions that publishers run into when they start actually beginning that tagging and putting that into the template. And so from there, and again, this process could be a few meetings, 1 meeting, 2 meetings. I mean, it just really depends on your familiarity with the LRMI. So from that, we'll move into technical support. So this will be a point for if you have, internal technical expertise to actually tag your content, maybe embed that within your web pages, create landing pages. Well, then, if you already have all the knowledge, you can just run with it. And if that's not something that your organization has, then we are formalizing an evaluated service providers program that we can offer a list of vendors who know about the LRMI, can help you do the tagging, can really help guide you through that process. And from there, at this point, we really hope that you've got it. We hope that you're again feeling really confident about the LRMI and how it's going to help the future of your business, and again internally as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the commonly asked questions that publishers run into, and we also have a content provider's guide and a tagging guide, which are a new, I think, updated version is going to be published soon, right? Yeah, updated. So there's an updated one, and so there's two. One will outline all the initiatives and a lot of stuff we've talked about, as well as kind of reiterating some of these questions that publishers run into in their tagging. So one is, what if we have print products? So although the LRMI searches for metadata on the web, even if you have print products, I mean, again, I don't know the technical process of it, but essentially you're going to create a landing page with information about that product, so it's referenceable. Again, Again, the only property that's really required in the LRMI is a unique URL. So, so again, if you have print products, you can create landing pages for that. Another one is age and grade, and this has been touched on as well. So again, the LRMI is very much an international standard, and you just need to do a crosswalk between the age and grade level. And again, this would be beneficial if you're looking to really extend your business internationally. I mean, something to get you started thinking about incorporating age into your products. So, what if you're missing metadata? So again, like we talked about before, is that there is only one required property, that's URL. And again, also within the template, that if you find me afterwards, I can send you digital copies of that. But I mean, essentially, if you have, say, 3 tags with your content versus 12 tags, I mean, we're going to encourage you to tag as much of your content with the properties and additional schema.org properties if it applies to your resources. Because again, I mean, the end goal is to help really improve the search and discoverability of your content. What's the best level of granularity? So that one is actually, it's really hard. There is no clear-cut answer for that. You know, I don't think you showed your video, but usually Michael has this really awesome video of an old Apple commercial, and it shows, you know, kind of the art and science of tagging. And again, this is really specific. It's like something you need to have a talk within your organization. Again, like who's accessing your content? How are they searching for it? How can you tag it to be more relevant for what they're looking for? I can say commonly what I've seen is, you know, publishers or content creators, you know, educators who are self-authoring content, they may tag at a chapter level. Some may tag at units, but again, there's some discrepancy there because some will have units and then multiple lessons and chapters within that unit. So, I mean, again, that's something that you have to kind of think about. You know, if you have a larger resource and you're tagging multiple, you're tagging multiple like lessons within that resource, you know, then the teacher will be able to find a larger resource. So, those are things to think about. And then one of the last ones is use rights. So again, it has not been formally adopted to schema.org, but we see it's very important for especially commercial publishing community to integrate that. So we do have it as one of the pathways, but again, we expect, you know, with more mass and more people showing interest, that schema.org could adopt that soon. So again, my name is Teila. Feel free to find me at any point, and happy to set up a meeting and talk a little bit more about the LRMI. So.
Thanks, Teila.
Yeah.
So what Teila didn't tell you is that everything she described is free. So see, so you want like 3 of them, right? So what was that old Lucille Ball joke about this? Something was 20% off, so if you wanted to buy 5, so you get it for free. Okay, so that's how percentage works. We're funded actually by the Gates Foundation through at least the end of April. I know that's coming up fast. But potentially through the end of September. Call us, use us. We're happy to hand walk you, your team, increase awareness. And by the way, important to recognize, not just for publishers. If you're a school, you're a school district, we do a lot of work with states to try to help them. We look at sort of workflow within the organization about the best place to integrate it. One of the funniest conversations with an organization early on is they said, oh yeah, we're going to tag all our resources and we're going to have our webmaster do it. There is actually probably no worse person in that organization. Maybe the CFO. I'm trying to think who else worse could do tagging. I mean, the goal is get somebody who actually has the content expertise, and the more you can move that upstream to the person who's actually doing the development work, the less effort it actually is too. So once you get this into the process, it really flows really nicely, and you'll find it has secondary effects on the quality of your product and how you work. So it's really, there's somebody nodding their head. Believer, I want to shout, yes! So it's really good, there you go, thank you. So I just wanted to point that out. So what we're gonna do now, I forgot to tell people to turn their phones to stun. Hands-on tagging activity. So thanks for hanging in there, but this is a really good chance to ask questions and to try different things. How many of you have an asset that you've created that you might want to try tagging just with a group? So there's somebody there. Anybody else? You have one? So if you're interested in sort of trying theirs, you can certainly group around them if you're interested. We also have some assets that you can use. So what we're going to do today is we're going to complete 1 or more sets of metadata. Teila's going to hand out some worksheets just to have sort of the metadata properties that we've been discussing today, so you'll have those, and something you can begin to work on. you know, it all kind of makes sense to you right now, but then you start looking at it, and suddenly it's that Ansel Adams thing about sort of a vague concept, and that's fine, and better to do it as part of a community and figure that out. And so we'll discuss the issues associated with that resource digestion and representation, and then share some initial thoughts. And we sort of know some of the things that you may discover, but important for you to get a chance to do that. So either you can use either things that are supplied by us. So Teila has.
So we have information so you can access ISLE.
Stand up and talk.
So you have information that you can access ISLE. We have BrainPop, some of their free assets. Buesing Publishing also has some assets, as well as we do have some print products as well. So if you don't have some, just raise your hand and I can bring some over to you. There you go.
So what I suggest is, again, working in groups of maybe 4 or 5. You find some people who you want to work with. We're going to take about 25 minutes to do this, and we're going to circulate while you're doing it. And then we're going to come together and talk. Again, BrainPop assets, Buesing Publishing, and ISLE.
I want to talk to Michael for a minute first.
I missed that in the first. You did show it, but it was, I don't know, it's really. Sure, you can take one for your child, because you need to show up with something, of course, coming home from being on the road. I know, been there, done that. So let me just ask you, so what did you discover in the process of actually doing this? Any sort of thoughts? Where did you sort of hit, where did it get hard? Or where did it get controversial?
Language.
What's that?
Language.
So because of the nature of the asset that you were working with? Yeah. So tell me more about that. I like the one-word response.
Well, we have a product that is a Spanish-speaking product for an English-speaking student group. And so we had a lot of discussions around how you would tag that, to make sure that you're reaching your target audience, you're not mislabeling this as a product for native Spanish speakers.
Yeah. I have to say, doing this for over 2 years, that's the first time we've had that one come up, but I love it. It's a nice little brain twister. Because, the audience, of course, if you're a Spanish speaker, you don't need it.
Right.
So you wouldn't want to search on that language term as Spanish.
Right.
Because that's typically, so I always go back to sort of the use case around that. But I think it's a really good part that has to be defined around how to use those properties. And that's what we always talk to people who are doing tagging, is think about, put yourself in the shoe of the person who's going to be searching. I think that's probably the way to think about it.
If you're trying to learn a certain word,
yeah.
and you're Spanish speaking, you're not going to search for that word because you don't know what it is in English. You're going to search for it in Spanish. But you need to show up as English.
Yeah.
Know what the equivalent is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be a good one. I'll bring, I guarantee you, when one of the committees that we have together comes to consensus, I'll bring that one up, and then we'll just start it all over again. So
thanks a lot.
Yeah. Other issues? Because we had some groups that were really into it. We had this group dissolve. They ran. I think they were afraid. How about you two back there? You were doing some nice work. He looks behind them. Me?
Yeah, we ran into a lot of the same issues in a lot of those categories. It's activity is in what is an activity, and it's in many categories. You'd almost have to have meetings with the organization. The organization say, okay, we're all probably going to agree on this, and then it's a lot of discussions. More than just filling out a form.
And I think that's a big issue that we're going to have to all grapple with in education, which is that there's all this sort of semantic legacy that comes from the way we used to refer to things, because we never saw them in the same place at the same time. And so now, I think there's some of that consistency that, again, I think we have to sort of come to an agreement to disagree, but use some of the common language around that just to make this usable. And I think the benefits will far overcome the drawbacks of that consensus making.
Right, we are also talking about, some of the categories were a format versus an instructional method versus a level in Bloom's taxonomy. And it's like, okay, which one are we going to use? Or should we use them all so that they can be findable?
Yeah, and so the approach that's been taken by LRMI around things like that is to simply declare what it is that you're using and then let you use it. And so the point is that it's not meant to set policy around education, but it's really meant to provide a place for common discussion around usage. And I think that'll hopefully help resolve some of these things at least a little bit better, at least within this digital community, and maybe will inform practice. But it sounds like a cop-out to sort of not put your stake in the sand, but at the same time, you hate to alienate 2/3 of any one population, but instead really, and that's true for Lex Labs. There are a number of ways to describe reading levels or reading comprehension levels. They stepped up and said, we're going to try to put a way to be able to make sense of this in a way that's digitally friendly. And I think that'll drive that discussion.
So
Yeah.
I just had a question. We were talking about how these initiatives are pretty time consuming and it's a big decision to go in and take a big collection.
Yeah.
Are people collecting data on usage and how, you don't want to build it no one uses it, right? So some of these things are out there already, are people keeping track of it?
So the question was, is anybody keeping track of how this is being used and whether it's being used, et cetera? The AAP actually just finished a survey, and I don't think the results are out for that yet, are they?
Yeah, they should
So
be out in a couple of weeks.
if you make sure that we have your information, we'll send you that about sort of how and where it's being used. I want to emphasize something I said earlier, and that is that legacy content is always difficult, just because it's always hard to go back and retouch that. But at the same time, today's new becomes legacy tomorrow. So we really urge people and organizations to start thinking about how to move that early in the process. Because it turns out the incremental effort becomes minimal once you've taken on the task. And the value that comes out of it eventually is huge. And I always liken it to the old couple sitting on their front porch and said, man, I wish we had planted that oak tree 40 years ago. The time to do it is when you thought about doing it. And so that's really the case when it comes to things like the LRMI. Any other, yeah?
There's a lot of content being created nowadays and very useful content on, say, YouTube, SlideShare, Khan Academy, and individuals are creating a lot of good content. So any thought, how you can actually tag those content?
So anybody can tag that. Our goal personally, for our organization is to really go to the source of that. So we would talk to Khan Academy and others around beginning to use these. Organizations like the group in Iowa that we talked about, the ISLE tool, for example, they're actually reaching out and looking at other assets and how they're going to tag that for their use. So not specifically Khan, but maybe other assets that are important to them. Even though they're not the creator, they may in fact represent the nature of how that's being used. So that's one model, certainly. Again, we're evangelizing, getting the creator to really begin to take on that role and take ownership of that process. Did that answer?
So basically you're looking at these content creators to actually provide a tool through which user can actually tag it.
So the tool purpose, so some, like when we work with Pearson, they create their own tools, right? And plethora of those. But we're working with Teila, who spoke earlier, is actually driving a service providers program where we're working with organizations that are actually, they provide services to publishers or tool sets that wrap around that and looking at how they can integrate the LRMI as part of that tool set. So you could, if you're using one of their tools, you would inherently be able to tag with LRMI, and they're looking at how to either embed that metadata as part of the asset or how to export that for digestion by Learning Registry, or as you and I talked about, as APIs for exchange and interoperability between applications. So we, again, happy to put you in touch with those organizations if you're interested.
So a question related to that. So LTI, Learning Tools Interoperability.
Yeah.
I started to learn a little bit more about that, and I was just wondering, are the tags and methods that are used within that system, are they consistent with what you guys are doing, or are they
Yeah, again, very consistent. As Colin Smythe over at IMS, that group whole heads up the whole LTI effort, says metadata schmetadata. He doesn't care what it is. He really honestly just wants to manage the data. And so from his perspective, sure, LRMI, come on in, not a problem. We can represent that within, with any kind of wrapper that we're providing there. So we're just right now grappling with that organization and sort of how that's going to work. They want to make sure everything's free and clear of IP and all those other pieces, which I think is fine. So we're actually right in the throes of that discussion. So again, I just want to remind you, we're here to help you. So, that's what we live for, really. I mean, to me, it's exciting to think about the world that will come from implementing the LRMI and some of the fundamental foundational pieces that'll make changes in education. And I do want to thank our speakers who really put a lot of effort in today. Trilby Berger from MetaMetrics. Yay! And Sue Buesing from Buesing & Associates. And my colleague Teila in the back, and Dave and for all of his support in this from the AAP and the AAP organization as a whole. So really a good group. I do want to mention, just because AAP, if you're interested, has a conference in June, early June in Washington, D.C. called Content in Context. And there's a whole technical thread in that conversation as part of that, but it's also discussion about looking at trends in the marketplace, et cetera. For full disclosure, I'm actually the chair of that conference. So I feel like, but I think it's a great conference, really I do, not just because it's my baby, but because I think there's some great stuff happening there. So thank you all so much, especially for those of you who hung in there. I really appreciate it. Thank you.